Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a retired investigator seeks peace in a remote Montana cabin, he finds anything but. An old trail, a relentless neighbor, and a battle for the truth ignite a war over property, power, and survival. Some lines you don't just draw, you defend them. Welcome to the Gate War. I bought the place in early spring when Montana was still undecided about whether winter was truly over. 12 acres of forest sloping gently down toward the lake, an old hunting cabin that smelled like pine sap and cold stone, and a narrow dirt trail cutting through the trees like a scar that never fully healed. The realtor called it rustic character. I called it quiet, which was exactly what I'd been looking for after 12 years as a county sheriff's investigator in Utah. I didn't leave law enforcement because I hated the work. I left because I was tired of people who believed volume could replace facts. The property file was thick. I read it the way some people read novels. Deeds, surveys, easements, amendments. The trail stood out immediately. Decades ago, it had been an informal footpath locals used to reach the lake. That changed in the late 90s when the previous owner formalized the land boundaries and negotiated a tax adjustment with the county in exchange for closing the path and assuming full maintenance and liability. No public easement, no right-of-way. Clean, final, recorded. The kind of paperwork judges like because it doesn't argue back. The first week, I didn't do much besides listen. Wind through the trees, water hitting the shoreline. The occasional truck on the county road up the hill. Then I started noticing movement. Footsteps where there shouldn't have been any. Voices drifting through the trees. One afternoon, I looked out from the cabin porch and saw a man walking a dog straight down the trail. Plastic bag swinging from his hand like he was strolling through a park. He waved at me. Friendly. Oblivious. I waved back. Less friendly. More incredulous. I put up signs the next morning. Not aggressive. Not theatrical. Simple. Private property, no trespassing, no access to lake. They were mounted on posts, clearly visible, spaced properly. By the end of the week, one had vanished. Another had been turned backward. Someone had left an empty soda can near the trailhead, like a calling card. That was when I decided signs weren't enough. Before I installed anything permanent, I double-checked. County office, land records clerk. Same answer twice. The trail was mine. Liability was mine. Responsibility was mine. So was the decision to close it. I ordered a steel gate, heavy-duty hinges, a reinforced frame, and a coded lock rated for outdoor use. Not cheap, but cheaper than a lawsuit when someone twisted an ankle and decided my shoreline looked profitable. The gate went up on a Thursday. By Saturday, it already felt like it had been there forever, solid, quiet, final. I added 2 more signs and a small, discreet camera angled toward the trail entrance. I wasn't expecting trouble. I just preferred evidence over arguments. The trouble introduced itself the following Monday at the local hardware store. I was loading fence brackets into the bed of my truck when a woman blocked my door with her cart, like we were in a standoff scene from a low-budget Western. Late 50s, maybe early 60s. Sharp eyes. That particular posture people adopt when they believe they're about to correct a mistake the universe made without consulting them. "You're the one who closed the trail," she said, not a question. I looked at her, then at the cart, then back at her. "If you mean the private access path on my land, yes." She laughed, short and humorless. "That trail's been there longer than you, longer than me. People have used it their whole lives." "That doesn't make it public," I said. Calm, neutral, the way I used to talk to suspects right before they said something regrettable. She leaned closer. "You don't get to decide that." "My deed does," I replied, "and the county." Her face tightened, like she'd bitten into something sour. "I'm Karen Defoe. I live up the hill. That lake is part of this community. It's part of the watershed," I said. "The land isn't." She stared at me, measuring, filing something away. "You should open that gate before this turns into a problem." I smiled then, because sometimes smiling is the fastest way to end a conversation without raising your voice. I deal with problems for a living. This isn't one. She watched me get into my truck like she expected me to reconsider halfway through the motion. I didn't. By the time I pulled out of the lot, she was still standing there, hands gripping the cart handle, jaw set, already rehearsing whatever story she planned to tell next. That evening, I walked the perimeter again. The gate stood exactly as I'd left it. The signs were intact. The trail beyond it was empty, quiet, reclaimed by shadow and undergrowth. I poured a drink and sat on the porch, watching the lake darken as the sun dropped behind the trees. Peace, I'd learned, doesn't announce itself. It just exists until someone decides they're entitled to it. I didn't know then how determined Karen was, but I recognized the look in her eyes. I'd seen it before, usually right before someone tried to turn a personal belief into a legal claim without bothering to check the difference. It was barely past 6 in the morning when I noticed the gate was open. I hadn't heard anything unusual during the night, but I was up early anyway. Old habits don't die. They just wake you before sunrise. The lock was missing, not broken or hanging useless like a trophy, just gone. The chain lay coiled like a discarded snake on the ground. The gate itself stood open, one side nudged awkwardly against a sapling as if whoever passed through didn't bother closing it or didn't want to. I didn't rush. I took a slow walk down the trail, phone in my pocket, hand near my concealed carry out of habit, not necessity. It was cool and quiet, the lake hidden behind early mist and low sun. About halfway down the trail in the soft dirt, I spotted footprints, narrow heel, wide toe, boots, or thick sneakers. The stride was deliberate, not someone jogging or exploring, someone walking like they belonged here. When I returned to the gate, I noticed a familiar gleam just off the gravel, the broken remains of the lock tossed into a clump of grass. Not cut, pried, tool marks at the latch confirmed it. A blunt force job. Someone had used leverage, not finesse. Nearby, I found a worn garden glove and a single hairpin bent into a sad approximation of a lockpick. I took photos of everything, careful not to touch anything barehanded. Then I went back inside and checked the camera feed. There she was, Karen Defoe, dressed in a light jacket and wide-brimmed hat like she was going for a leisurely morning hike, calmly approached the gate carrying a crowbar, not even trying to hide it. She used the tool with practiced familiarity, forced the lock, and shoved it in her jacket. Then she stepped through, dropped the crowbar in the grass like it was beneath her, and headed down the trail like she had every legal right to be there. No hesitation, no second glances. I watched the footage 3 times, then made a secure backup and archived it. I didn't call the sheriff that morning. Not yet. It wasn't because I had doubts. I didn't. I just learned, over the years, that there's power in documenting before acting, in making sure every I is dotted, every T crossed, and every inch of rope she was so eager to hang herself with was neatly coiled and labeled. Instead, I called my attorney, a woman named Elise Beckwith, who specializes in private property and nuisance law. Sharp as a nail, calm as a glacier. I sent her the footage and a detailed report of the break-in, photos, timestamps, GPS coordinates, the works. She called back within the hour. "This is clean," she said. "You've got criminal trespass, vandalism, and possibly attempted theft if she took the lock. You want to go public, private, or tactical?" "Let's start with tactical," I said. "File the paperwork. Prep for a protective order. I want a restraining boundary on her before she thinks this is a game." Elise got to work immediately. Meanwhile, I replaced the lock with a new one. High security, bolt-hardened, uncuttable without industrial tools. I added a reinforced pad, an anti-pry shield, and 2 more cameras, one overhead, one wide angle. Then I printed a laminated notice stating, "Private property. Entry is a crime. Trespassers will be recorded and prosecuted. Trail is not public. Documents available upon request." I left 1 copy on the gate and another on a wooden post nearby, just in case someone didn't see it. I also placed a small, solar-powered spotlight aimed at the signage. Visibility was no longer an excuse. That evening, just as the sun dipped behind the pines, a rust-colored Subaru Outback slowed down near the end of my gravel driveway. I stayed behind the porch railing, out of sight, and watched as the driver's window rolled down. Karen. She didn't get out, just stared at the gate, then at the trail, then at the laminated sign. After a minute, she pulled out her phone and took several photos. Then she drove off, tires crunching slowly, like she was daring me to stop her. The next morning, I received a letter in my mailbox. No stamp, hand-delivered. "Your actions are hostile and inappropriate. That trail has been in community use for generations. Your gates are unlawful. Expect community involvement." Community involvement. That phrase stood out to me like a bullet casing on a clean floor. Elise filed for a temporary restraining order that same day and sent a cease and desist letter directly to Karen's property address. Not that I expected her to care. People like her didn't understand paper unless it came with a badge or a fine attached. By midweek, I was getting used to checking the gate every morning like it was part of my coffee ritual. One morning, I noticed a small rock had been placed on the lock housing. Flat, carefully positioned. Not accidental, not wind. Message received. That night, I slept with the cabin's external motion alarms activated and my boots by the door. Not because I was scared, I just didn't want to be surprised. In law enforcement, you learn quickly. The people who think they're right are the most dangerous when you prove they're not. I didn't need to prove anything yet. I just needed her to come back. And based on everything I'd seen, I knew she would. She came back on a Sunday. It was one of those deceptive spring mornings that looked peaceful until you paid attention. The wind had that metallic edge to it, the one that rustles tree limbs just enough to make you second-guess what you're hearing. I'd woken early, double-checked the gate, rearmed the motion sensors, and made a thermos of strong coffee I didn't really need. The night before, Elise confirmed the temporary restraining order had been granted, effective immediately. Karen was now legally prohibited from setting foot on my property or crossing any boundary. I printed a laminated copy and mounted it right on the inside of the gate, facing the trail. She couldn't miss it. What she didn't know was that this time, I wasn't the only one watching. I'd spoken with the Gallatin County Sheriff 2 days prior, gave him the full package, footage, timestamps, documents, the restraining order, her handwritten threats, everything. He was unimpressed in the way only seasoned lawmen can be, not because it wasn't serious, but because it was just familiar. "You've got more evidence than we usually get in court," he said. "Want to catch her in the act?" I did. So, we made a plan. I watched from the cabin's upper loft, where the view gave me the front half of the gate and the trail beyond. Deputy Stills and Sergeant Hanley were already in position, parked out of sight down at the lakeside end of the trail, a half-mile through the trees. I'd cut a small side access path a week ago just for moments like this. Quiet, hidden, perfect. It was just after 10 when Karen arrived. She wasn't alone this time. With her were 2 guests, a man and a woman, both in hiking gear, both with the air of people who were only hearing one side of a story. Karen led the way, her voice unmistakable even through the trees. Loud, theatrical, full of self-righteous narration for her little audience. They stopped at the gate. One of her companions pointed at the laminated court order and hesitated. Karen waved it off with a laugh. "He typed that up himself." "It's fake," she said. Then she pulled a small set of bolt cutters from her backpack. I admit, I didn't expect that. Crowbar, sure, maybe a wrench. But bolt cutters? She came prepared. With one practiced snip, she sliced through the lock like it was a twist tie. She pushed the gate open with a flourish, turned to her companions and said, "See, he's bluffing. This is public. Always has been." They walked through. Exactly 4 minutes later, the forest rustled in a way that didn't belong to the wind. Sergeant Hanley stepped into view first, calm, steady, hand on his belt. Deputy Stills flanked him, holding a printed copy of the restraining order. Karen froze like a raccoon caught in a floodlight. Her guests stopped short, confused, unsure of who they were looking at or what they had just walked into. Hanley spoke clearly. "Ma'am, you are in violation of a court-issued protective order. Please place your hands where I can see them." Karen sputtered, tried to backpedal with words first. "This is a mistake. He doesn't own this trail. It's public domain. I've walked this path for 40 years. Stills read from the paper, "Per Gallatin County Court, restraining order effective 3 days ago. Entry onto this property is a misdemeanor. Destruction of private gate hardware elevates that to vandalism." "I didn't destroy anything," she shouted. I stepped out of the woods then, holding up my phone. "You sure about that?" "Because I've got high-definition footage of you cutting through a lock, walking past 2 clearly posted signs, and violating an order you've already been served." One of her guests asked, "Karen, what the hell is going on?" She didn't answer. She started crying. I don't mean sniffling or welling up. I mean full-body sobs, the kind people perform when they realize they've run out of words, and there's nothing left but noise. "You can't arrest me for walking," she yelled through tears. "You can't just block off nature. It's against the law." Hanley didn't flinch. "No, ma'am. Blocking access to your property is legal. Ignoring a court order and cutting through a locked gate is not." Stills moved in and read her Miranda rights. She resisted at first, not violently, just flailing dramatically, like she thought embarrassment would be more effective than cooperation. It wasn't. They cuffed her. Her companions backed away, clearly rethinking their morning plans. As they led her back toward the patrol car waiting on the access road, Karen looked over her shoulder and screamed, "You'll regret this, Travis. Everyone in this valley will know what kind of man you really are." I didn't answer. I just locked the gate behind them and reattached the busted chain, not because it would hold, but because it made a point. The rest of the day was quiet. That evening, a short video, grainy from a bystander who had been hiking near the lake, made its way onto a local Facebook group. The clip showed Karen being walked to the cruiser, shouting about historic access and spiritual rights to the water. The comments section exploded. Some people defended her, some didn't. One guy posted, "I hiked that trail once in 1986. Guess I should sue the state too." By nightfall, a local blog had picked up the footage. Headline, "Gatekeeper Showdown. Woman arrested over lake trail dispute." I poured a drink and sat on the porch, listening to the trees move. The gate stood closed. The trail was empty. She'd be back. Not in person, not for a while. But people like Karen don't accept consequences. They weaponize them. I wasn't worried. I'd dealt with worse than her. But I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the part where she stopped using tools and started using lawyers. The court date came quicker than I expected. Karen spent one night in the county jail before bailing herself out the next morning. Her mugshot didn't go viral, but it did end up in one of those local incidents write-ups that old-timers read over coffee. My phone started ringing by noon. Neighbors, ex-coworkers, even my contractor laughing and asking if I really had someone arrested for walking. I kept it civil. Not for walking, I said. For trespassing, vandalism, and violating a court order. The truth didn't always travel fast, but I was determined to keep it on the rails. 2 days later, I received a notice via certified mail. Karen had filed a civil suit against me. According to the filing, she was suing for wrongful arrest and humiliation, illegal denial of historic community trail access, emotional damages exceeding $50,000, and my personal favorite, malicious entrapment. I nearly choked on my coffee when I read that one. Entrapment for putting a lock on my own gate and having a restraining order. Elise, my attorney, was less amused. She met me at the cabin with a folder in one hand and a tight-lipped expression. "This isn't a joke, Travis." She's got a real firm behind this. Halden Myers. Mid-tier but loud. They'll go for optics. Meaning they'll try to paint you as the crazy old loner hoarding nature like a dragon with a hoard of pine needles. I didn't laugh. She's the one who broke the law. She'll claim you provoked her. She'll say this was about access rights and decades of unspoken community use. If they get the right judge, this could drag out for months. Then let's not give them an inch, I said. Let's fight it head on. Elise nodded. Good, because we're filing a counterclaim, harassment, trespass, destruction of private property, violation of restraining order, and now, malicious litigation. We worked late that night. Elise brought her associate, Adam, who handled digital archiving. They cataloged every photo, every minute of footage, every social media post, including the Facebook video that had now racked up 22,000 views and counting. Comments were split between "Karen did nothing wrong" and "play stupid games, win stupid prizes." But Karen didn't stop there. 3 days after her release, a small group of people started appearing at the edge of my gate. They never crossed, just hovered. Middle-aged hikers with old trail maps, teenagers on bikes, even a guy with a clipboard who claimed to be conducting a survey of blocked access routes. He refused to say who hired him. I checked his car when he wasn't looking. It had a rental tag. Then came the letters, typed, unsigned, and slipped into my mailbox like whispers in the dark. "You don't own nature. That lake was here before you. You can't lock us out forever," Elise warned me. They're trying to create the illusion of a public right-of-way. If enough people say they've always used that trail, they might try to claim prescriptive easement. It's rare, but it's real. I knew about easements. They were legal landmines and often abused by people who thought routine trespassing was a birthright. That weekend, I had professional surveyors on my land. Not some shady HOA hired hacks, real pros with GPS stations, county permits, and drone scans. They confirmed what I already knew. The trail was 100% on my land. No overlap, no encroachment. I paid extra for expedited certified documentation, notarized and bound. Then I took it further. I reached out to a retired Forest Service geographer who'd worked in the area for 30 years. He reviewed old plats, historic maps, and confirmed in a sworn affidavit that no public trail had ever officially passed through my land. Elise smiled when I handed it over. That, she said, is going to hurt them in court. But Karen still wasn't done. 2 nights later, someone threw a rock through my front window. No note, no follow-up, just shattered glass and silence. I reviewed the footage, but whoever did it wore a hoodie and moved like they knew where the blind spots were. I called the sheriff. Deputy Stills arrived 20 minutes later, quietly fuming. "We're upping patrols," he said, "and we're moving this from nuisance to potential intimidation. She's playing with fire now." I replaced the window with reinforced security glass. Then I bought a second set of motion sensors, thermal this time. No more blind spots. The civil suit moved ahead. Karen's attorneys demanded mediation. Elise laughed and refused. "They want to settle with headlines," she said. "We're going to settle with evidence." Our court date was set. 30 days. In the meantime, Elise advised me not to post anything publicly. No interviews, no social media. Let them scream into the wind. You stay quiet, stay solid. I followed her advice. But something told me Karen had one more card to play, and she was saving it for the moment I least expected. By the time the court date arrived, the atmosphere around my property had shifted from quiet paranoia to something more insidious, like the tension before a thunderstorm. I wasn't getting direct threats anymore. I was getting pitting looks. A neighbor down the road stopped his truck one afternoon, leaned out and said, "Travis, why not just let them use the trail? Folks around here think it's been public for decades." I looked him dead in the eyes. "You ever let someone borrow your car without asking? What happens when they keep it long enough that they think they own it?" He didn't have an answer, just muttered something about not wanting drama and drove off. Drama or not, court was here. It was a windy Wednesday morning in the Gallatin County Courthouse. Small town, small courtroom, nothing flashy, just a square room with wooden pews, a judge in black robes, and 2 legal teams bristling with quiet tension. Karen showed up in a soft blue cardigan, hair pulled back, no makeup, with a box of tissues she kept palming even before testimony began. She brought supporters, 4 people in folding chairs behind her table. One of them held a printed sign, "Land for people, not profit." Elise was unshaken. She wore a dark gray suit like armor and carried 3 binders, 2 thick legal pads, and a flash drive. I sat beside her, silent but ready. My boots were still dusty from trail work. I didn't dress up. I dressed truthfully. The first 2 hours were procedural. The judge, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 60s, made it clear she had no interest in emotional exhibitions or small-town drama. She gave both sides 15 minutes to outline their arguments. Karen's attorney launched into a full-blown Oprah moment. He spoke of generational use, traditions of community hiking, and how gates and fences represented the decay of neighborly bonds. I lost count of how many times he said heritage. Then came our turn. Elise stood and calmly presented a certified map, signed affidavits, a notarized chain of title that showed continuous private ownership for over 70 years, and a dozen photos with timestamps showing Karen ignoring posted signs, violating the court order, and cutting the lock on my gate. But the best part, Elise didn't even raise her voice. She let the facts land like body shots, quiet, painful, undeniable. When it came time for witness testimony, Karen took the stand first. She cried a lot, claimed she thought the trail was public, that she never saw the signs, and that the restraining order confused her because she didn't understand the legal language. Elise waited until the judge finished scribbling notes, then calmly pulled up the footage of Karen reading the posted order out loud to her hiking friends, word for word, right before she cut the lock. The judge looked up slowly and said, "So you read the order aloud and then entered the property anyway?" Karen wiped her nose and said, "I thought it was fake, like a prank." Elise's voice was silk-covered steel. "And the bolt cutters, were those a prank too?" Karen didn't answer. Then came my turn. I took the stand, swore in, looked Karen in the eye once. She looked away. I told the story plainly, how I bought the property, discovered the unspoken trespass, tried to handle it civilly, and eventually had no choice but to act when Karen kept escalating. I told them about the rock through my window, the anonymous letters, the strangers showing up like ghosts, trying to make a legal lie feel like the truth. I didn't embellish. I didn't posture. I just told it like it was. When I stepped down, Elise dropped her final card, a sworn deposition from the retired Forest Service geographer stating unequivocally that no recorded trail, path, or public easement had ever existed on or across my land. That was the turning point. Karen's attorney scrambled. He tried to bring up an old local hiking pamphlet from the 1980s that mentioned a waterfront path, but Elise was ready. She held up a current county record showing that the pamphlet was based on informal user maps, not legal surveys. The judge recessed for an hour to review everything. When we returned, her decision was swift and delivered like a hammer to stone. All claims brought forth by the plaintiff are hereby dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I find sufficient cause to pursue the defendant's counterclaim regarding repeated trespass, violation of a restraining order, and property damage. Karen's mouth fell open. She turned to her attorney like she hadn't heard the words correctly. But it got worse. The judge continued. This court orders a formal cease and desist against the plaintiff and any associates from entering or attempting to access the defendant's property. Violations will result in criminal charges. Additionally, damages are to be assessed during the next hearing. Karen sat down slowly. Her supporters were already on their feet, collecting their signs, visibly shaken. Elise leaned over and whispered, "That's checkmate." The next hearing was set for damages. In the days leading up to it, I stayed out of town. Not out of fear. I just didn't want to be around for whatever Karen might pull next. Elise warned me that people like her didn't lose quietly, and sure enough, the moment the judgment went public, Karen doubled down on her campaign of victimhood. Local Facebook groups lit up with posts claiming I had stolen public land, militarized a hiking trail, and even one that said I pulled a gun on a teenager. Completely fabricated. Elise flagged every post and began building a case for defamation. Then something snapped. A week before the damages hearing, I got a call from Deputy Stills. "You might want to get home sooner than later," he said. "There's been an incident." When I returned to the cabin, I nearly drove off the gravel road. Someone had set fire to the fence. It wasn't fully destroyed. The fire had been smothered by rain halfway through the night. But the blackened section and scorched earth around it sent a clear message. This wasn't vandalism anymore. This was arson. Stills walked me through the report. Accelerant traces on the base. Gasoline or kerosene, most likely. No prints, but we've got tire tracks on the south side. Looked like someone drove through the woods, got close, then lit it up and bailed. "Do you think it was her?" I asked. He hesitated. "No proof yet, but timing's not a coincidence." That same day, Elise filed an emergency motion to include the arson incident as part of the damages claim. The judge approved it immediately. At the next hearing, Karen finally started to crack. She came in wearing a neck brace of all things, claimed the stress of the lawsuit had caused neurological tension and whiplash from emotional trauma. Her lawyer looked exhausted. I could tell he was getting tired of being her mouthpiece. Elise presented a detailed breakdown of financial and material damages. The destroyed section of the fence, over $6,000 in materials and labor. The shattered window, $1,200. Extra legal fees caused by her malicious countersuit, $9,000. Professional surveying and notarized land studies, $4,500. And the kicker, $25,000 in punitive damages for violating the restraining order, repeated trespass, and the psychological impact of the harassment campaign. All backed by receipts, contractor statements, and court-approved documentation. Karen's attorney tried one last desperate move, arguing that community emotion should outweigh rigid interpretations of property law. That got a visible eye roll from the judge. Her ruling was crystal clear. The plaintiff has abused the court's time, knowingly violated a court order, and endangered the defendant's safety and property. I award the defendant total damages in the amount of $45,700. Karen gasped. Her attorney didn't flinch. I think he already knew. But it didn't stop there. The judge added, "This court is referring the matter of suspected arson to the district attorney's office for further investigation. If it's proven that the plaintiff or any of her associates were involved, criminal charges will follow." Karen lost her composure. She stood up and shouted, "This is my trail. He's the thief." "Not me." The bailiff had to escort her out while she kept yelling, "He stole the mountain. He stole it." It was surreal. Outside the courtroom, reporters were waiting. The story had grown legs, partly because the arson was now a criminal matter, partly because Karen had been so vocal online, and now she was being eaten alive by her own narrative. "We didn't speak to the press," Elise told them. "We're letting the facts speak for themselves." And speak they did. 3 days later, a warrant was issued for Karen's arrest, not for the arson yet, but for violating the restraining order a second time. She had been caught on trail cam walking past the burned fence section, holding a camera, muttering something about documenting crimes against nature. She was arrested again, and this time held without bail. The DA confirmed they were actively investigating the arson, and her online postings and known whereabouts that night didn't help her case. One post even mentioned, "Maybe the fire will cleanse the land." Elise printed that one for the record. Meanwhile, the local news ran the story under the headline, "HOA activist arrested again after land dispute spirals into arson allegations." I replaced the fence the next week, stronger this time. Steel posts, motion lights, thermal cams. I even added a sign, "No trespassing," not even a little. It felt petty, but also earned. After Karen's second arrest, things quieted down, but not in the way peace normally feels. It wasn't calm. It was the eerie, suspended quiet of a town waiting for the hammer to fall. I started getting emails, not threats this time, apologies. From neighbors, even a couple of HOA members saying they had no idea how far she had taken things. One guy from 3 streets over wrote, "Didn't realize she was actually dangerous. Thought it was just a neighbor spat. Sorry for signing that petition." Another woman sent a homemade pie and a note that read, "If you need anything for the cabin, let us know." Some of us never supported her, but it didn't feel like goodwill. It felt like they knew the ship was sinking, and they were trying to swim to dry land before Karen dragged them under. Elise kept busy. The civil judgment had gone through, and the county was preparing to garnish Karen's wages and seize her assets to cover the $45,700 in damages. She tried appealing it, of course, claimed the judgment was biased and unfairly rushed. The appellate court shot her down in less than a week. Meanwhile, the DA's office made their move. They had matched gasoline traces at the fire site with a container found in the back of Karen's car, which had been impounded after her arrest. Then they pulled her phone GPS data, which placed her within 300 feet of my fence at 2:34 a.m. the night the fire was set. But the real clincher, they subpoenaed her online chat logs. In a private Facebook group called Trail Guardians, she had messaged someone, "No one will care if a fence burns. Maybe he'll finally leave. I'm not letting him erase our trail." When I read that line, I didn't feel anger. I felt relief. Because now it wasn't just trespass, or contempt, or even civil damages. This was felony arson, and the case was airtight. Karen was formally charged with second-degree arson, destruction of property, and violating a protective order, and held pending trial. Her attorney dropped her. Public defender stepped in. Her once vocal supporters disappeared overnight. The HOA board removed her from her committee positions and issued a statement. "Ms. Davenport's actions do not reflect the values or direction of our community." Too late for that. The trial date was set for 3 months out, and Elise made it clear she was not letting the civil angle go either. She filed a follow-up motion to freeze Karen's assets, including a rental property she owned, a second car, and a sizable HOA stipend she was still collecting for her community service leadership. The judge approved the freeze within 48 hours. While we waited, Elise prepared our final countersuit, a sweeping claim for emotional distress, harassment, malicious defamation, and targeted retaliation for lawful land use. Combined, it was an additional $120,000 in damages. And it was more than just about me now. She attached 3 more affidavits from other residents who had also been harassed, pressured, or bullied into silence by Karen when they tried to speak out about HOA overreach. One man claimed she had threatened to fine him for violating trail view aesthetics by putting up solar panels on his own roof. Another said she publicly accused his wife of destroying native flora for planting non-native daffodils. It was a pattern. Elise saw it. The court was starting to see it, and soon a grand jury would see it too. That summer, I rebuilt the cabin deck, installed a new grill, bought a second kayak. My dog, an old shepherd mix named Boone, had more room to roam now that I'd reinforced the perimeter. I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted a real permanent reset. But Karen wasn't done making headlines. A journalist with the Bozeman Chronicle broke the full story. The lawsuits, the arson charge, the restraining orders, everything. And with it came the final twist of the knife. Karen was being investigated for HOA fraud. Turns out, her stipend wasn't just a small committee check. She had approved $36,000 in fake invoices from a consulting company, which was just an LLC registered to her cousin in another state. She siphoned off funds under the radar, claiming they were for ecological surveys and community impact assessments, but the surveys didn't exist. And the consultant? He lived in Florida and ran a vape shop. The HOA treasurer, now acting president, turned over all financials to the county, and the fraud case was added to her growing list of charges. Karen wasn't facing just property-related trouble anymore. She was looking at real prison time. The courtroom was packed on the first day of Karen's criminal trial. Local reporters filled the first two benches. A couple of former HOA members sat near the back, faces pale and drawn, trying to avoid eye contact with me. I recognized them, people who once cheered for Karen's vision. Now they sat quietly like bystanders at a car crash they helped cause but didn't know how to stop. Karen entered in a tan jumpsuit. Her hair was tied back, no makeup, no smug expression, just cold, exhausted defiance. She glanced around the room, caught sight of me for a split second, then looked away. The charges were read aloud. Second-degree arson, destruction of private property, violating a court order, felony fraud, and misuse of HOA funds, defamation, harassment, criminal trespassing. She pled not guilty. The prosecution opened strong. Photos of the burned fence, thermal camera stills showing her movement that night, GPS logs from her phone, and printouts of her own messages, all of it laid out, piece by piece. Her attempt to claim she was nowhere near the scene evaporated under the weight of digital evidence and physical proof. When the HOA's new treasurer took the stand, he brought records. Line by line, he detailed the fake invoices, the payments to her cousin's sham company, and even the fabricated receipts for trail maintenance supplies that were never purchased. Elise testified too, not as my lawyer, but as a witness to the harassment, the civil violations, and Karen's coordinated campaign against me. The judge allowed it as part of establishing her pattern of behavior. I took the stand last. I told the jury everything. How I bought the land, my intention to live quietly, the gradual unraveling of normal life under Karen's pressure. I spoke about the first incident, the fake claims, the public shaming, the police being called. I told them about coming home to see my fence scorched and blackened, about replacing shattered windows, about watching my dog bark into the darkness at night because he knew someone was out there. And I told them about the trail cams, about how I caught her, over and over again, walking my land like she owned it, because in her mind, she still did. The defense had almost nothing. They tried to argue that Karen had acted out of community interest, that she'd lost her way, and that the real danger was privatization of wild space. It was a last gasp. The jury didn't buy it. After 6 days of trial, they returned the verdict in under 4 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge was brutal. He cited the scale of her deceit, the danger of the arson, the abuse of HOA power, and the targeted harassment of a private citizen as grounds for the maximum sentence. He didn't mince words. Ms. Davenport, you weaponized a position of community trust for personal vendettas, endangered lives and property, and attempted to undermine the judicial process with lies and manufactured victimhood. You were sentenced to 10 years in prison without possibility of parole for at least 6. Karen didn't cry. She just sat still. Maybe it hadn't hit her yet. Maybe it had the moment she saw the photos of her own messages blown up for the jury. As she was let out in cuffs, she didn't look at me. But I watched her, a woman who tried to burn me out of my own land, now being escorted into a future of cold cement and locked doors. Outside the courtroom, Elise handed me a stack of documents. This is the final claim, she said. When the fraud gets processed, the restitution will hit. You'll get everything you're owed. And I did. Over the next 6 months, I received over $100,000 in judgments, damages, and restitution, plus legal fees reimbursed by the state, and an official apology from the county HOA board for their failure to properly oversee Karen's actions. They dissolved her former committee. The trail was closed permanently. Signs went up reading private property. Access revoked by order of court. I had Boone out by the fire pit the night they tore down the old trail marker. It was quiet. No more shouting. No more banging on fences, no more trespassers, just the sound of wind through the trees. That winter, I finally finished the cabin porch I had put off since moving in. Elise came by for coffee a few times, and once, after a long snowfall, stayed the night. She joked that my place had become a fortress of solitude. Maybe, but it was mine. And now, no one was ever going to take it from me again.